It began quietly, like any small-town rumor, the kind whispered between parents in grocery aisles and dismissed by administrators as superstition. Briarwood Academy, a private boarding school tucked in the dense hills of northern Vermont, was known for its immaculate grounds, its ivy-wrapped brick buildings, and its high tuition. Yet beneath the polished brochures and smiling staff, a single fact lingered in every local conversation. No class had ever produced a senior year. Every fall, a new crop of students would arrive, filling dormitories and classrooms, but by spring of what should have been their final year, they were gone. Not expelled, not transferred, just gone. Their names were scrubbed from the roster, their dorm rooms emptied overnight, their belongings boxed and whisked away in unmarked vans before dawn. The first hints of something wrong surfaced in local papers as early as 1964, when a parent anonymously told the Burlington Gazette that her daughter had stopped writing letters home in her junior year. "They told me she dropped out," the mother wrote, "but I never signed any forms. I never heard her voice again. Her friends acted like she had never existed." The school dismissed the article as the ramblings of a disgruntled parent, but soon more letters emerged, describing eerily similar situations. Students, bright and well-adjusted, suddenly becoming distant, speaking in monotone, staying up all night in the campus library staring at empty notebooks. Some parents reported hearing strange noises when calling the school's landline late at night, faint static, rhythmic tapping, and a distant chorus of whispers that would bleed into the line before anyone picked up. An investigative journalist named Aaron Cross began digging into the phenomenon in 1971 after receiving a set of documents mailed without return address. The files contained enrollment records, all marked with red stamps reading "transferred," but no receiving schools were listed. Tucked between them were grainy black and white photos, students standing in the academy's central courtyard at dusk, motionless, their heads tilted upward toward the bell tower where a faint green glow seemed to leak from the windows. Cross traveled to Briarwood to confront the administration, but vanished before his first report went to print. The only trace he left behind was a cassette tape mailed to his editor a week after his disappearance. On it, his voice whispers shakily over static. "They're not leaving. They're being taken. The tower opens when the clocks stop." The tape ends with a deep metallic clang, followed by 30 seconds of low, resonant humming. Surviving students who eventually broke silence painted a fractured picture of their time there. One, a former junior now living under a new identity, recalled waking at 3:14 a.m. every night to the sound of soft, synchronized footsteps in the hallway outside his dorm. The steps always paused at his door, followed by a calm, synthetic female voice whispering through the crack, "Stay awake. Do not ascend yet." Others described seeing faint green light seeping through the gaps of the library floorboards late at night, accompanied by what they swore was the sound of machinery operating far below the school. One student claimed to have seen her entire class, 31 of them, standing in the courtyard one fog-choked morning, barefoot, their eyes open but unseeing, murmuring the same sequence of numbers in unison. 1 through 12, again, 1 through 12, again. Local workers brought in for renovations refused to stay past sundown. Several carpenters reported that their tools would vanish if left on site overnight, only to reappear arranged in perfect spirals around the bell tower by morning. One plumber swore he heard voices rising through the pipes, not in English but in some measured, rhythmic language that made his chest vibrate. He left halfway through the job, refusing to return even when offered triple pay, claiming the walls themselves were breathing. The state attempted to intervene once, in 1982, when a wave of missing person reports tied to the academy finally reached the governor's desk. A team of state troopers, accompanied by federal agents whose jackets bore no insignia, entered the school grounds late one evening. Neighbors reported hearing the academy's bell toll 12 times, each strike followed by a low pulse that rattled windows for miles. The troopers never filed a report. Within days, every official record of their visit vanished, along with the names of the missing students from state registries. Families were told their children had been relocated, though no details were provided, and many of those families quietly moved away in the years that followed, unwilling to speak of Briarwood again. Stranger accounts came from beyond the campus. Travelers passing the wooded roads near the academy during fog-heavy nights described seeing lines of pale, motionless figures along the tree line, always in multiples of 12, their heads tilted as if listening for something beneath the earth. Drivers reported their radios activating on their own, broadcasting faint, layered whispers. Circle incomplete. Await descent. Stay awake. Engines would stall for exactly 47 minutes, and when they restarted, every clock in the vehicle would read 3:14 a.m., regardless of the actual time. No one knows how many students truly disappeared from Briarwood Academy. Estimates from leaked insurance records suggest hundreds, possibly more than 1,000, between the 1950s and early 1990s, when the school abruptly closed under the guise of structural instability. The campus remains fenced and guarded by unmarked patrols, its name scrubbed from maps, its towering bell silenced. Yet locals still claim to see faint green light flickering through the boarded windows on moonless nights, accompanied by the distant sound of synchronized footsteps circling the courtyard, and those who live near the abandoned grounds insist the presence hasn't ended. They describe the same pulses rolling through the earth every 47 minutes, syncing with their heartbeats until they wake in a cold sweat. Some have begun hearing the whispers in their homes, layered and calm, repeating the same words over and over. Not finished yet. Do not ascend. Stay awake. And on fog-choked nights, when the wind dies and the trees fall silent, a few swear they can still hear the bell toll 12 times in the distance, each strike followed by a hum that feels less like a sound and more like a signal, calling those who hear it closer. The earliest testimonies from students who survived their years at Briarwood never appeared in official records. They surfaced through smuggled letters, anonymous phone calls, and tapes mailed to news outlets that would never air them. One such letter, sent in 1969 by a girl who signed only as C, described how her classmates began to change midway through their junior year. She wrote that the students no longer spoke freely, answering questions in short, measured phrases, as though reciting from memory rather than speaking. At night, she claimed, they would gather in the main courtyard, barefoot despite the snow, standing in perfect rings of 12 while the bell tower above them emitted a low hum, like a machine starting up beneath the school. When she told a teacher, the reply was chillingly calm. It's just preparation. They'll be gone soon. You should be too. Days later, her parents received a withdrawal form signed in her name, though she swore she never wrote it. She vanished weeks later on the road home. Whispers from within the faculty suggested something more deliberate. A janitor who worked on campus in the late 1970s told a reporter, off record, that every spring he was instructed to clean out the top floor of the East Dormitory, where only seniors lived before they vanished. He said the rooms were always immaculate, the beds perfectly made, yet a thin layer of soot would cover every surface, arranged in faint spirals. It wasn't dust, he said. It felt magnetic. If I stood there too long, my teeth would ache, like there was a vibration running through the air. He left the job abruptly after finding his own keys arranged in a circle on his nightstand one morning, despite living off campus. Local radio operators began intercepting strange transmissions during those years, always near the same hour, 3:14 a.m. Static would bleed into clear signals, carrying faint mechanical tones followed by layered whispers, male and female voices overlapping in unison. The content rarely changed, a countdown from 1 to 12 repeated 3 times, ending with a synthetic female voice stating, "Circle remains. Await descent. Do not ascend yet." Attempts to trace the source led only to a dead frequency, as if the broadcast was never there. Several operators who recorded the transmissions reported sleepwalking in the nights that followed, waking outside the academy grounds without memory of how they had arrived. Parents who pressed for answers met walls of silence. One father, a retired Air Force engineer, tried to retrieve his daughter after she stopped responding to his letters in 1984. He drove to Briarwood, only to be met by two men in grey uniforms who told him his daughter had been relocated for specialized studies. They handed him a folder containing staged photographs of his daughter smiling in a generic classroom. When he returned to his motel, he found his car parked neatly across the street, all his belongings stacked into concentric circles on the hood. He left Vermont that night, abandoning the vehicle entirely. Weeks later, a recording of his voice surfaced on a private ham radio channel, whispering through static. "They don't graduate. They go down. The school isn't a school. It's a gate." The strangest evidence came from a series of photographs smuggled out by a groundskeeper in 1990, just before the academy closed. The images, grainy and underexposed, depict the students in the courtyard during a fog-choked dawn, standing in 12 perfect rings that radiate outward from the bell tower. The tower itself appears to be glowing faintly, its windows filled with streaks of green light bending downward as if pulled into the earth. In the last photograph, a blurred silhouette of what looks like a faculty member stands at the base of the tower, their arms raised as though directing the motionless students. The groundskeeper disappeared days after mailing the photos to a journalist. The negatives were reportedly confiscated by federal agents posing as state officials, and the journalist resigned weeks later, relocating without notice. By the time Briarwood Academy shut its doors, the pattern was undeniable to those who had paid attention. No senior class had ever graduated. No missing student had been recovered, and every attempt to dig beneath the school, even for construction, ended with machinery stalling and workers refusing to continue, claiming they heard voices chanting through the bedrock. Yet even after the gates were locked and the windows boarded, the activity didn't stop. Residents of nearby towns continued to report seeing faint green light flickering through the fog where the school once stood, accompanied by the distant sound of the bell tolling 12 times, each strike followed by a deep, resonant hum that rolled through the ground like a pulse, matching the beat of anyone who dared to listen. Former students who escaped Briarwood before their final year described a steady shift in the school's atmosphere, one that began subtly and then deepened into something they could no longer explain. Several said the changes started with sound. The campus bell, once used only for routine schedules, began tolling irregularly at night, sometimes 12 times in succession, even when the clock showed no reason for it to ring. Each toll was followed by a faint vibration in the ground, so slight that glasses on desks would tremble. Those who lay awake said they felt the pulses match their heartbeat, slow and deliberate, until they either blacked out or found themselves standing outside their dorms without memory of how they got there. One surviving student, who later fled the country under a false name, recalled how the library became the center of the unease. After 2 a.m., the lights would flicker, and a faint green glow would seep through cracks in the floorboards, casting shifting patterns on the walls like moving water. "It sounded like machines under us," he told a private investigator years later, his voice shaking. "Not engines, more like doors, huge ones, opening and closing far below. And when the glow started, everyone who was awake would stop talking. It was like we were waiting for something to call us down." When he finally left the school, he found his journals blank, every page scrubbed clean as if nothing had ever been written. Town residents began noticing changes in the students too. Shopkeepers in the nearby village of Harrowfield said the older pupils moved in odd synchronization when they came into town, their heads slightly tilted, their voices flat and unblinking when spoken to. They never carried cash, only vouchers marked with the school crest, and often lingered in shops without buying anything, staring at the floors as if listening for something beneath. One shop owner swore she overheard two of them whispering in unison, counting softly from 1 to 12 before they both turned to look at her at the exact same moment and smiled. She closed her store for the season 2 weeks later and moved out of Vermont entirely. Leaked notes from a Vermont state police file suggest the state attempted a quiet inquiry into Briarwood in 1986 after 6 parents jointly filed missing persons reports for their children. 2 detectives were sent to the academy under the pretense of evaluating campus safety. According to the surviving memo, both officers reported feeling persistent disorientation while on the grounds, as though they were walking in circles despite GPS and compass readings showing straight paths. One of the officers noted the constant, low-frequency hum emanating from the bell tower, describing it as not quite sound, more like pressure against the ribs. The final page of their notes ends abruptly. Students lined in the courtyard, barefoot, eyes open, chanting, 1 to 12, over and over, the bell. The rest is smeared, the page soaked as if submerged in water. Neither detective was seen again. Those living along the road leading to the school claimed the fog near the academy took on a life of its own in the late 1980s. They described how, on moonless nights, the mist would roll outward from the campus like a tide, carrying with it faint whispers and the soft toll of the bell, though the tower had supposedly been decommissioned. Drivers caught in the fog often reported their cars stalling for exactly 47 minutes, their radios flickering on to emit a calm, synthetic female voice saying, "Stay awake. Do not ascend yet. Circle incomplete." One trucker claimed that when his engine restarted, every clock in his cab, dashboard, wristwatch, even the digital clock on his radio, displayed the same time. 3:14 a.m. An anonymous groundskeeper who worked on the property shortly before the school's closure said he was ordered never to enter the basement levels beneath the main building. Yet, late one night, he claimed he heard movement beneath the floors while working alone, a steady rhythm, like dozens of feet pacing in unison, accompanied by faint metallic groans as though doors were shifting far below. When he returned the next morning, his tools were gone, later found arranged in a perfect spiral in the center of the bell tower courtyard. Days later, his truck was discovered abandoned miles from his home, every item from the cab stacked into concentric rings on the road, but the man himself was never found. By the time Briarwood Academy shut down in 1991, the pattern had become undeniable to anyone who dared acknowledge it. No students ever graduated, their names and records erased, while those who tried to investigate either vanished or abandoned their work. And yet, even after the final students disappeared and the buildings were boarded up, the activity around the grounds continued. Locals say the pulses still roll through the earth every 47 minutes, strongest between 2 and 4 in the morning. On fog-choked nights, they claim you can still see faint green light bleeding through the cracks in the boarded windows, and if you stand too close, you can hear the bell toll 12 times, each strike followed by a hum so deep it feels less like a sound and more like something enormous moving in the dark below. In the years after Briarwood's official closure, the surrounding area never returned to normal. Locals began to avoid the winding road that led to the school, even in daylight, claiming the air itself felt heavier near the property line, as if the atmosphere was pressing inward. Hunters reported that the woods within a mile of the campus went silent, no birds, no insects, not even wind through the trees. When the fog came, which it often did at night, it would move in slow, deliberate waves, curling down the hills as though something unseen was pushing it outward from the grounds. Those who lingered too close swore they could hear faint, rhythmic sounds beneath the quiet, a deep pulse, steady as a heartbeat, that made their teeth chatter and their vision blur. Attempts to redevelop the property were met with incidents so unnerving they were never publicized. In 1993, a construction firm was hired to begin dismantling the dormitories for salvage. The crew left at sundown on their first day after heavy machinery stalled without mechanical cause, and every digital clock on site froze at 3:14 p.m., displaying the time in a faint green hue, even when unplugged. The next morning, workers returned to find all their tools, hammers, drills, even heavy saws, arranged in a massive spiral in the courtyard, radiating outward from the base of the bell tower. The company pulled out of the contract immediately, citing unsafe structural conditions, but internal memos leaked later revealed the workers had reported hearing layered whispers coming through their radios during the breakdowns. The voices, faint but clear, repeated a simple phrase: "Circle remains. Do not ascend yet." Local radio interference intensified, even though the school had been shuttered for years. Late-night listeners in nearby towns picked up identical signals on multiple frequencies, static punctuated by soft counting, always from 1 to 12, repeated 3 times before dissolving into a low hum. Some of these broadcasts included a female voice, calm and mechanical, whispering instructions: "Stay below, await descent, keep your eyes open." The interference had no traceable source, and FCC technicians sent to investigate reported nausea, nosebleeds, and lapses in time while within a mile of the campus. One technician, who resigned shortly afterward, claimed that during a blackout in his van, he saw faint green beams rising from the bell tower through the fog, only to bend downward into the earth, vanishing like they were being drawn into something beneath the school. People who trespassed onto the grounds despite the fencing often returned changed, if they returned at all. A pair of urban explorers who broke in during the winter of 1995 captured a fragment of footage before their camera cut out. The video, grainy and washed with static, shows the two wandering through the main hall when the building begins to vibrate in a slow, rhythmic cadence. Dust falls from the ceiling in sync with the pulses, and a low chorus of voices can be heard, counting softly in unison. 1 through 12. 1 through 12. The explorers are seen staring upward, mouths slightly open, before the footage distorts and cuts to black. Their abandoned car was later found parked neatly outside the gates, every item from the trunk stacked into concentric circles on the roof. Neither was ever located. Residents in Harrowfield and surrounding towns claimed the pulses grew stronger with each year after the closure. Between 2 and 4 in the morning, windows would rattle in homes even miles away, and some people woke to find their furniture shifted into subtle arcs, as though the house itself had been measured in the dark. Several reported vivid dreams of descending narrow staircases, spiraling downward into vast, dark chambers beneath the earth, each level lined with unmoving figures, 12 per ring, their heads bowed, whispering in tones too low to make out. Those who woke from these dreams often found faint spiral-shaped bruises circling their wrists and ankles, though no medical explanation was ever given. Even federal attempts to seal the area seemed ineffective. Beginning in 1996, patrols in unmarked grey vehicles were stationed along the road to the campus, warning away anyone who approached. Yet residents said the presence didn't remain confined behind those barriers. On nights when the fog rolled deepest, people as far as Montpellier claimed to hear the distant toll of the Academy bell, 12 strikes, each one followed by a low hum that resonated through the ground and into their bones. Some claimed to see lines of pale silhouettes gliding along ridgelines during these nights, always in multiples of 12, their movements eerily synchronized, their heads tilted slightly downward as if listening for something beneath their feet. By the late 1990s, the legend of Briarwood had evolved beyond whispers about missing students. Locals no longer spoke of the school as a building at all, but as a threshold, something that had never been meant to close. The pulses, the whispers, the spirals, and the lights, they were not remnants of whatever had taken place there, but continuations, signals in a process that was still unfolding beneath the earth. And though the campus stood empty, boarded and silent by day, those who lived near its borders swore that at night, when the hum rolled through the soil and the fog pressed low against the trees, they could feel something pulling, as if each pulse wasn't just sound or vibration, but an instruction. One step closer to whatever the tower above had always been leading down to. By the early 2000s, the land surrounding Briarwood Academy had taken on a reputation more like a living perimeter than an abandoned campus. Locals stopped approaching entirely, not because of fear of trespassing fines, but because of what the ground itself began to do. Farmers in nearby valleys reported their soil vibrating at consistent intervals, strong enough to ripple standing water in troughs even when the air was still. The pulses came predictably, every 47 minutes, and those who lingered outside during them often described the sensation of being gently pushed forward, as though something beneath the earth was subtly pulling at their bodies. Some even claimed their animals would begin circling in fields during these pulses, moving in slow, deliberate arcs until the vibrations faded. New trespassers still arrived, drawn by online rumors and whispers of proof that Briarwood had been a front for something far larger. Many didn't return, and those who did rarely spoke coherently about what they had seen. One pair of hikers, interviewed anonymously for a fringe radio show, claimed they entered through a gap in the perimeter fence and followed the old service road to the courtyard. There, they found every window of the boarded dormitories glowing faintly with green light, despite no power lines running to the buildings. They said the bell tower emitted a deep, resonant hum, so low it made their teeth ache, and that within the fog that rolled across the courtyard, they could hear voices layered in perfect unison, chanting softly, "Do not ascend, circle remains, stay awake." Before leaving, one hiker looked back to see faint silhouettes, 12 figures, rigid and pale, gliding in formation around the tower, heads tilted downward as if listening to something below. They left all their gear behind and refused to return to collect it. Technology near the site began malfunctioning in ways that mirrored the old reports. Car engines would stall without cause, headlights dimming to a dull green glow despite no change in the bulb. Radios switched on by themselves, playing not music but sequences of static punctuated by faint metallic clanging, like heavy doors opening and closing far below the earth. Cell phones left in the area overnight were found wiped clean of all data, their screens looping a soft spiral pattern when powered on, paired with a calm, synthetic female voice whispering, "Circle incomplete. Await descent." Several tech enthusiasts who tried to record these anomalies vanished during follow-up visits, leaving their vehicles neatly parked along the road with all possessions stacked in spirals on the hoods. In Montpellier, a string of late-night AM broadcasts began to draw attention. Always around 3:14 a.m., multiple stations would flicker to life, overriding regular programming to carry the same pattern. 12 strikes of a bell, followed by a hum so low it rattled the chassis of radios. Then came the voices, hundreds of them, murmuring softly in unison, counting upward from 1 to 12, only to restart. The broadcast would end with the same phrase, spoken by a measured female voice. "Transit delayed. Circle remains. Do not close your eyes." Listeners reported physical effects after prolonged exposure, nosebleeds, dizziness, and an overwhelming compulsion to leave their homes and walk toward the old school road, even if they lived miles away. Disappearances began to occur beyond the immediate perimeter. A mail carrier in Randolph was reported missing after his truck was found idling at a rest stop along Highway 302. The mailbags had been emptied, every envelope arranged into perfect spirals on the asphalt. His radio, still powered on despite the battery nearly dead, played a loop of faint, rhythmic pulses and a female whisper repeating, "Stay below, await alignment." Investigators noted no signs of a struggle. The man's watch was discovered days later on the edge of Briarwood's property, the hands frozen at 3:14. Even those who stayed far from the site weren't immune. Homeowners across central Vermont began waking to find items in their houses rearranged into subtle arcs and spirals, often centered on beds or entryways. Some awoke standing outside without memory of how they had left, barefoot on lawns marked by shallow depressions circling outward as if something had measured their position during the night. Many described hearing faint bell tolls in their dreams, always 12, each followed by a hum that vibrated through their bones. In the weeks after, some of these individuals vanished during heavy fog, their homes left pristine, every clock inside frozen at 3:14 a.m. Locals no longer spoke of Briarwood as simply a closed school. It had become something else, a mechanism, or perhaps a threshold that had never truly shut down despite the fences and patrols. The spirals, the voices, the green light, and the clock-stopping pulses were not remnants of an old event, but active signals, part of an ongoing process still shaping the land and the people drawn into it. and every time the bell could be faintly heard tolling through the fog, 12 measured strikes rolling across the hills. Those who listened too closely swore they could feel their heartbeats slowing, aligning with a rhythm that wasn't their own, pulling them closer to whatever the tower had always been built to awaken. By 2004, the strange activity around Briarwood had expanded so far beyond the original grounds that nearby towns felt as though they were living under a shared, invisible weight. Entire neighborhoods in Barr and Randolph began to report simultaneous disturbances at the same hour, 3:14 a.m. On these nights, power flickered in perfect unison, radios switched on without signal, and homes shook faintly as the now familiar low vibration rolled up through the earth. Some residents described waking to find every clock in their house stopped at the same time, each display glowing faint green despite batteries and power sources being removed. Others said they awoke standing outside, barefoot on lawns marked by faint spiral impressions circling outward from where they stood, with no memory of how they had left their beds. It was during this time that a new pattern emerged, one tied not just to the pulses, but to sound that bled into daily life. People reported hearing faint, synchronized counting leaking into their telephones during calls, or woven into the static between FM stations, always reaching 12 before looping back. In several cases, recordings captured the counting, accompanied by a calm, mechanical female voice repeating, "Circle incomplete. Transit near. Stay awake." Audio engineers who analyzed these clips noted that the underlying hum carried infrasonic frequencies capable of inducing disorientation and mild hallucinations. A few technicians who worked with the recordings vanished without warning, their desks left meticulously cleared, their possessions stacked into concentric rings on the floor as if arranged by unseen hands. Those who dared to investigate the school grounds during this era met the same fate as those who had trespassed before, though the phenomena became more structured. A group of 3 amateur documentarians entered the property one fog-heavy night, intending to capture evidence of the legendary Briarwood Pulse. Their final camera footage, recovered months later from a pawn shop, shows the trio approaching the courtyard as the bell tower begins to emit a deep, throbbing hum. The fog thickens around them, and dozens of faint silhouettes, 12 per ring, arrayed in perfect circles, emerge around the tower, gliding silently with their heads bowed. The footage distorts as a layered chorus of whispers fills the air. "Stay below, await alignment. Do not ascend yet." The film cuts to black. Their car, discovered days later, sat parked neatly at the property line, headlights glowing a dull green despite a dead battery, every item from the trunk placed in a perfect spiral on the hood. Local authorities stopped attempting any formal presence near Briarwood after multiple patrol teams reported unexplained time losses while stationed near the property. One trooper, in a recorded statement to his superior before resigning, said the pulses felt like a clock ticking in my bones, each one slowing his thoughts until he couldn't tell whether he was awake or dreaming. He described hearing faint metallic sounds echoing from below the ground, like doors sliding open and shut in rhythm with the vibrations. The final line of his testimony before he walked off duty for good: "They're not gone, they're not above us. They're waiting underneath." His uniform and equipment were later found in a neat ring on his kitchen floor. The man himself was never located. The broadcasts grew stronger during these years, as if whatever was driving them no longer needed subtlety. Entire radio stations across central Vermont were overridden at 3:14 a.m. by the same repeating cycle. 12 tolls of a bell, a low mechanical hum that rattled windows for miles, and layered voices counting in perfect unison. Some broadcasts carried additional fragments, faint clanging like enormous doors moving far underground, followed by the mechanical female voice instructing, "Prepare descent. Do not resist. Circle will align soon." Listeners who heard these messages in full often reported episodes of sleepwalking within the week, waking in fields or on deserted roads, standing barefoot in spiral impressions they didn't remember walking. Several never returned home after these episodes, their homes left untouched except for one detail. Every clock frozen at 3:14 and faint, deliberate scratches on the walls forming the same spiraled shapes found around Briarwood itself. Even as federal patrols tightened their hold on the area, the phenomenon itself seemed indifferent to containment. Residents as far as Stowe and Montpellier described seeing the infamous column, 12 pale figures gliding silently along ridgelines, moving in unison with the distant pulses. Those who followed them, out of curiosity or compulsion, often blacked out and awoke in unfamiliar locations miles away, with their vehicles repositioned and belongings stacked into rings around them. Witnesses said the figures never looked up, never spoke, but their presence was always accompanied by the layered whispers, faint but distinct. Stay awake. Circle incomplete. Do not ascend. By the mid-2000s, the locals had stopped trying to explain or disprove what was happening. The pulses, the counting, the lights, the voices. They were no longer curiosities or rumors. They were a schedule, a system, something vast and unseen that used Briarwood not as its origin, but as its threshold. And those who lived close enough to feel the ground hum beneath their feet every 47 minutes knew the same truth. Each pulse wasn't just sound or tremor. It was a signal, a call to a line, drawing everything and everyone closer to whatever waited below, as the bell tower's long silence chimes still echoed faintly in the fog, counting down. By 2007, the influence radiating from Briarwood felt less like an anomaly and more like a program running on a schedule, expanding outward whether anyone chose to acknowledge it or not. The pulses were now strong enough to be felt across entire townships, subtle tremors that rattled windows and caused loose objects to vibrate every 47 minutes, even when no seismic activity was recorded. Families reported their pets hiding in closets during these intervals, trembling and refusing to move until the vibrations subsided. Others described waking to find their furniture subtly shifted, chairs slightly turned, tables nudged into arcs, forming faint, incomplete spirals around the rooms, as though the house itself had been measured in the night. Those who claimed to be most sensitive to the pulses often experienced something stranger, a slowing of their heartbeats and thoughts, followed by a quiet compulsion to move. They would wake standing outside, sometimes miles from home, barefoot in the fog, positioned at the center of shallow depressions pressed into the soil. Several described seeing faint green lights glowing faintly between trees or across open fields, moving in long, slow arcs that seemed to draw them forward. The lights never behaved like lanterns or headlights. Witnesses swore they bent toward the ground as if tethered to something deep below rather than shining outward. Many of these individuals vanished within weeks of their first encounters, their homes left pristine except for one repeating detail. Every clock stopped at 3:14 a.m., and all loose belongings, photographs, dishes, even children's toys, arranged into perfect spirals on the floor. Patterns in the broadcasts also grew more elaborate, suggesting something was building toward a conclusion. Radio operators intercepted cycles longer than ever before, lasting over an hour, each starting with 12 tolls of a bell, followed by deep, resonant pulses that made the speakers rattle. Layered whispers, hundreds of voices in perfect synchronization, would count upward from 1 to 12, looping endlessly. But new phrases began to surface in the mechanical female voice that always followed. Circle nears completion. Transit imminent. Do not close your eyes. Listeners who captured these transmissions reported auditory afterimages, hearing the hum and whispers hours after turning off their radios, often during the moments just before sleep. Some began murmuring the numbers unconsciously during the day, unable to stop. Documented sightings of the column surged. The pale figures, always 12 in formation, were no longer confined to the forests or ridgelines. Drivers on Interstate 89 reported seeing the silhouettes gliding along the median in thick fog, their movements perfectly matched to the rhythm of the distant pulses. One trucker, whose dashcam footage was confiscated after circulating briefly online, described how his cab lights dimmed to green as his radio switched on by itself. The recording, which leaked through underground channels, captured a faint chorus of voices whispering, "Stay below, remain awake, do not resist." Moments later, the camera distorts as 12 blurred figures appear beside the road, all facing downward before the feed cuts to static. The trucker woke hours later in a different county, his rig parked neatly on a service road, every object from his cab, paperwork, tools, even loose change, stacked into concentric rings around the tires. Attempts to study the phenomena only deepened the dread. A private research team, unaffiliated with federal agencies, attempted to deploy seismic sensors around the perimeter in late 2007. Their findings, leaked to a fringe publication, revealed a repeating pattern of low-frequency waves emanating not just from beneath the Briarwood grounds, but from points in a widening radius across central Vermont. The pulses were synchronized, converging at regular intervals as though they were all part of a single system. The team's report concluded with one stark line: the tower was never the source, it is only the surface marker. Days after submitting their findings, the entire team disappeared. Their equipment was later found arranged in spirals along the road leading to the academy, each sensor still powered on, quietly emitting the same layered whispers. "Transit begins soon. Stay awake. Stay below." Even those far from the state began to feel ripples of whatever Briarwood had become. Travelers along isolated highways in New Hampshire and upstate New York reported unexplained blackouts, waking in their cars hours later to find themselves parked neatly along back roads, their clocks frozen at 3:14, their belongings stacked in rings around their vehicles. Many of these individuals claimed to hear faint bell tolls in their dreams afterward, 12 chimes followed by a hum so deep it felt like it vibrated their bones. Some swore they could see the silhouettes of the column gliding in the distance, even hundreds of miles from Vermont, always moving in time with the pulses. By the close of 2007, those who still lived within Briarwood's shadow had stopped asking what was happening. The pulses, the whispers, the spirals, the green light, the figures, they were no longer seen as separate incidents, but as pieces of a deliberate sequence, one that was approaching a final alignment. And each time the deep hum rolled through the earth, syncing with the heartbeats of anyone awake to feel it, locals whispered the same uneasy thought, unsure whether it was theirs or something implanted by the voices. "It isn't coming. It's already moving, and we're just waiting for our turn to descend." By 2009, the phenomenon linked to Briarwood no longer felt bound to the school grounds at all. It had become a drifting presence, threading through towns and forests alike, appearing wherever the pulses and voices converged. Residents in distant places, small New Hampshire villages, rural corners of Maine, began describing the same events that Vermonters had lived with for years: synchronized blackouts, clocks freezing at 3:14 a.m., radios activating to carry whispers and soft counting, and the recurring toll of 12 bells echoing faintly through the fog. It didn't matter if they were a mile or 100 miles from Briarwood. When the pulses came, the ground hummed, and the counting began, people knew they were already inside the reach of whatever was moving beneath the earth. What disturbed many was how deliberate the appearances had become. The column, the 12 rigid, gliding silhouettes that had first been seen along ridgelines, now emerged along suburban streets, highway medians, even in grocery store parking lots during heavy fog. Witnesses swore the figures never reacted to being seen. They only moved in slow formation, heads bowed, in perfect time with the deep pulses rolling through the ground. Drivers whose cars stalled in the presence of these figures often experience complete memory gaps, waking hours later with their vehicles relocated and their belongings arranged in spirals on the asphalt. In every case, their watches and dashboard clocks were frozen at 3:14 a.m., and many reported hearing a calm, mechanical female voice in the moments before they blacked out. "Do not close your eyes. Circle nearing completion. Transit imminent." Radio transmissions became more coordinated, as though the scattered fragments from earlier years were building into something unified. Multiple stations across state lines carried simultaneous broadcasts, overriding regular programming in the early hours. The cycle was always the same. 12 tolls of the bell, a resonant hum that vibrated through walls and bones alike, and hundreds of layered voices counting from 1 to 12, looping endlessly. New instructions began surfacing between the cycles, delivered in that same detached female voice. "Circle a line soon. Remain awake. Stay below." Listeners described an escalating compulsion, not fear, but an irresistible draw to leave their homes and follow the pulses into the fog, no matter where it led. Many of those who vanished in this way left their houses untouched, every clock frozen, every loose object stacked into perfect concentric rings centered on their beds or doorways. Investigators who dared to document these broadcasts often met the same fate as previous researchers. A small team of sound engineers based out of Concord set up directional antennas to pinpoint the source of the signals, hoping to prove they were artificial. Their findings, leaked briefly before being scrubbed from every public archive, claimed that the signals didn't originate from Briarwood at all, but from 12 separate points across the region. Each point emitted the same low-frequency hum, perfectly synchronized, converging at intervals like pieces of a larger mechanism. The final line of their report read, "The tower was never an origin point. It's one of many anchors." Days later, the team's van was found abandoned along a deserted logging road, its doors locked, every piece of recording equipment dismantled and arranged into spirals on the ground. The engineers themselves were never found. Even ordinary citizens, far removed from the direct epicenter, began describing a shared dream that mirrored the accounts of those closer to Briarwood. People from across New England reported vivid, recurring visions of descending, spiraling staircases carved into black stone, each level marked by 12 motionless figures standing in a ring, their heads tilted downward toward a faint green glow rising from somewhere deeper still. Some dreamers claimed that in the final moments before waking, they could hear the toll of the bell echoing far above them, each strike followed by a hum that seemed to slow their heartbeats until they felt weightless, as if falling. A few never woke from these dreams, their bodies discovered in bed, eyes open, with faint spiral impressions pressed into the skin around their wrists and ankles as if they'd been held in place. By the end of 2009, the notion of Briarwood as a single haunted school was long gone. What had once been confined to ivy-covered walls and an abandoned bell tower now seemed to stretch across entire states, its signals flowing through the ground, the airwaves, and even the dreams of those who had never stepped foot in Vermont. Locals stopped referring to it as the school and began calling it the descent, whispering that the pulses weren't just marks of time but steps, a countdown not to a date but to a movement. And when the fog rolled thick enough to blot out the horizon and the deep hum synced with their own heartbeats, many began to feel that it wasn't a question of if they would be drawn into the spiral, but when. Each pulse carried the same thought, repeated softly in voices they could not shut out. "Do not resist. The circle will close soon. Stay awake." By 2011, whatever had begun at Briarwood no longer resembled a local disturbance. It moved across entire regions like a living circuit, activating in patterns no agency could predict or stop. The pulses, once confined to rural Vermont, were now felt along coastal towns in Massachusetts and deep into upstate New York. They were measured on civilian seismographs as faint, repeating waves, each one occurring exactly 47 minutes apart, but they never registered as natural tremors. Those who studied the readings noted a strange uniformity. Each wave carried subtle modulations, like layered murmurs, barely audible but undeniably human. The researchers who tried to filter those sounds from the data often vanished within weeks, leaving their labs meticulously cleared, every piece of equipment dismantled and arranged into concentric spirals across the floor. The manifestations grew bolder. Residents in cities as far as Albany and Worcester reported the column, 12 pale, rigid silhouettes moving in perfect formation, gliding through fog-heavy streets in the early morning hours. They never spoke, never reacted to being seen, but their passage always coincided with power failures and sudden drops in temperature. Drivers who encountered the column described their headlights dimming to a dull, unnatural green while their radios activated on their own, broadcasting faint, layered whispers. "Stay below. Circle nearing alignment. Do not ascend." Some drivers awoke hours later in completely different locations, their vehicles parked neatly on isolated roads, fuel tanks drained, every personal item from inside stacked into deliberate rings around the car. Broadcasts began to converge, no longer scattered signals, but a synchronized phenomenon across multiple states. Dozens of late-night radio stations would switch simultaneously to the same transmission at 3:14 a.m. 12 tolls of the bell, followed by a deep hum that rattled walls, then the voices, hundreds, counting from 1 to 12 in perfect unison before looping back. New phrases began to appear between the counting, delivered by the mechanical female voice that had haunted the airwaves for decades. "Transit begins soon. Remain awake. The circle will not open above." Some listeners reported losing hours after hearing the full broadcast, waking outside their homes, barefoot in spiraled impressions pressed into the frost, their clocks and watches frozen at 3:14, regardless of the actual time. The few investigative teams that remained were swallowed as quickly as they appeared. One independent group, funded by a private foundation, deployed underground microphones near 12 suspected anchor points across Vermont and New Hampshire, locations where the pulses seemed strongest. The team recorded faint metallic impacts beneath the earth, echoing like enormous doors opening and closing, synchronized with each pulse. In their final report, before they disappeared, they wrote, "It is not a single site. The pulses converge into something deeper, something descending. Each anchor is only a surface marker." Their abandoned van was found outside an unused rail tunnel, doors locked, equipment arranged in a perfect spiral around the entrance. The microphones, still powered, emitted only the layered whispers of hundreds of voices murmuring, "Circle incomplete. Do not close your eyes. Remain below." Ordinary people began to sense the progression without understanding why. Dreams grew more vivid and uniform. Thousands across New England reported the same recurring vision, a slow descent down an endless spiral staircase, each level lit by a faint green glow rising from below. On every landing stood 12 motionless figures, heads bowed, whispering in tones too soft to understand. Dreamers would hear the tolling of the bell far above them, 12 chimes, each followed by a hum so deep it slowed their own heartbeat until their vision blurred. Many awoke in cold sweats. Others woke outside entirely, barefoot on lawns or empty roads, standing within shallow, concentric depressions they couldn't explain. A growing number never woke at all, found in their beds with open eyes and faint spiral-shaped bruises encircling their wrists and ankles, as though something had gently held them down. By the end of 2011, it was no longer a question of where Briarwood's influence reached. It was a question of what the phenomenon was assembling and when it would finish. Locals across multiple states whispered that the pulses weren't random signals or warnings. They were steps, each hum another stage in a countdown leading somewhere beneath the earth, to a place no one could see, but everyone felt drawing closer. And on nights when the fog rolled deep and the ground trembled like a heartbeat, those who couldn't sleep swore they could hear it more clearly than ever before, the voices layering over one another in the stillness, whispering the same 3 words in perfect unison: transit, descend, align. By 2013, the Briarwood phenomenon no longer felt like a haunting or a regional anomaly. It moved with the precision of a mechanism that had been running for decades, each pulse and whisper, another gear turning towards something inevitable. Entire towns across New England began to experience the full cycle. The fog rolling in unnaturally thick, the ground trembling every 47 minutes, radios and phones activating on their own to carry the same layered counting, always 1 to 12, looping endlessly. Between the counting, the calm synthetic female voice would surface, repeating new variations of the same instructions. Transit has begun. Circle near enclosure. Stay awake. Stay below. No one could trace the source, and those who tried, radio technicians, geologists, even private security teams, either vanished or abandoned their work after waking to find every possession they owned stacked in spirals around their homes as though marked by whatever was orchestrating the events. The column of 12 figures became a common sight, their rigid forms gliding through fog-bound streets, highways, and fields. They never interacted, never deviated from their slow, synchronized movements, but their presence had effects. Lights dimmed to an unnatural green hue, engines stalled, and every clock, from dashboard readouts to wristwatches, froze at 3:14 a.m., even when the figures appeared in broad daylight. Those who watched for too long often blacked out, later waking miles away with no memory of how they got there. Their vehicles, if they had any, would be neatly parked with every object inside: paperwork, tools, food, even coins, arranged into precise, concentric spirals. Survivors described one consistent detail. Before losing consciousness, they would hear a low, resonant hum rising from beneath the ground, as though something vast and mechanical was stirring below. The broadcasts shifted again, becoming less like scattered signals and more like coordinated messages synchronized across multiple mediums. Televisions would flicker to life in empty houses, screens displaying slow-turning spirals of green light overlaid with faint, unintelligible text. Radios carried the familiar pattern. 12 tolls of the bell, the deep hum, hundreds of voices counting, and the synthetic female voice whispering, "The circle closes. Do not ascend. Prepare to descend." Even personal devices weren't immune. Phones, laptops, and digital watches would power on without input, their screens flickering with spirals, while faint, rhythmic pulses emanated from their speakers, timed perfectly to the vibrations rolling through the ground outside. People exposed to these signals for extended periods often began murmuring the counting sequence in their sleep, their voices matching the rhythm without awareness. Some stopped waking entirely, found in their beds with eyes open and faint spiral-shaped imprints on their skin, as though held in place by invisible hands. Attempts to destroy or disrupt Briarwood's remains were fruitless. In late 2013, a demolition crew contracted by an undisclosed agency arrived with heavy equipment to raise the last standing structures, including the infamous bell tower. The operation lasted less than a day. Witnesses from nearby ridges reported seeing green lights spilling upward from the tower's windows before bending downward, vanishing into the ground as if being drawn back into something below. The crew's machinery stalled simultaneously, every engine dying despite full fuel reserves. Radios on site erupted with overlapping whispers, hundreds of voices chanting, 1 through 12, transit begins, stay below. The workers fled, leaving their equipment behind. The next morning, all vehicles were found lined neatly in the courtyard, every piece of machinery dismantled and stacked into spirals around the tower's base. None of the crew were ever located. By the close of 2013, those who still lived within reach of Briarwood's shadow no longer spoke of the school at all. It was no longer a building, a ruin, or even a single location. It had become something far larger, a network of signals, pulses, and movements spreading beneath towns, highways, and forests, aligning those it touched into patterns they could not resist. The pulses felt heavier, the counting louder, and the green lights more frequent, flickering in mirrors and windows like echoes of something deeper. People whispered that the cycle was nearly finished, that each hum and toll of the bell was another step toward a final descent. And when the fog rolled thick and the vibrations sank into their bones, they could hear the voices more clearly than ever, layered in a calm, perfect harmony, delivering the words that had threaded through every broadcast and dream for nearly half a century. Circle complete. Descent begins. Stay awake. Stay below. No official body has ever acknowledged what Briarwood truly was, or where the thousands who vanished have gone. The grounds remain fenced and guarded, its name erased from every updated map, yet the phenomenon persists. A rhythm no barrier can silence. And though few admit it openly, those who have felt the pulses or heard the counting know the truth. It no longer matters whether they go near the campus. The process has already reached them. The hum in their walls, the whispers in their radios, the spirals appearing on their floors at night, all are signs of alignment. And when the bell tolls 12 times again, carried on the fog and shaking the ground beneath their feet, they won't need to ask what waits below or where the missing have gone. The voices will be there, soft and certain, guiding them as the vibrations rise and their thoughts slow to match the rhythm. Do not ascend. Do not close your eyes. You are already descending.